it's a strange time historically in the world of media, I think, because there's so much of it now, right? I mean, in terms of the 24-hour television. So there's this need to have a machine that's feeding it constantly. And you would think on the one hand that this would create more space for longer stories or different kinds of stories or stories that are more complex. And in fact, that hasn't been the case. It's repetitious. It's the same story with the same simple line again and again. On the one hand, I want to say if you have more time, then you can tell a better story. But that's not always the case. The other thing, I think, when you're dealing with television or radio is it's a preconception that's being challenged, I think, more in public television and public radio, is that you can only make one point in a story. So, when you're telling a story, you end up often with a sort of he said, she said, right? Yeah. This dualism. Okay, there's only two points of views, and that's what you have to tell. And I think certainly in radio more than television, I've seen a shift in the last 10 years away from that to a certain extent, and more into narrative, more into storytelling, more putting the journalist in the story, which raises all sorts of complexities that you don't get in a traditional news format. So, I see two things happening. Again, on the one hand, the repetitive 24-hour news cycle that we see on television all the time, and yet in radio, I do see more complex storytelling than I remember in the past.